Welcome back. Well, it's time to hand you over to Tumelo Mututwane, who joins us now from the Houghton Hotel with the latest. Tumelo?
Well, Faith, indeed, we are in Johannesburg at the Houghton Hotel, and in a twist of events, what was meant to be the chairman's conversation between Power FM's chairman, MSG Africa's chairman as well, that is Given Mkhari, as well as President Cyril Ramaphosa. Well, that event, we can confirm that it will not be taking place anymore, of course, due to reasons that have to do with gender-based violence. Now, these are some of the domestic issues that have been tabled against Given Mkhari. I'm sure you do remember allegations did come up a couple of months ago between Given Mkhari as well as Ipelem Mkhari, where both of them had, of course, pressed charges of domestic violence and assault against one another. Well, of course, some organizations have protested the president's decision to attend the chairman's conversation, saying that Given Mkhari is not the man to have the conversation with due to some of the allegations that have been tabled against him. I do have my colleague Samkele Maseko, who in his possession has the official statement from government with regards to the president pulling out. And I just want to bring in Samkele Maseko into the conversation and say, what does the official statement from government say with regards to this twist of events?
Well, Tumelo, the official statement of government is reading that President Ramaphosa has decided to withdraw from the chairman's conversation hosted by Gauteng-based radio station Power FM. His participation was slated for the 28th of November 2019 in Johannesburg. In light of concerns raised by civil society organizations Wise for Africa and Soul City Institute regarding the scheduled event, the president has, upon careful consideration, decided not to participate. President Cyril Ramaphosa firmly believes that he, like every other South African, has a responsibility to do everything within his means to confront gender-based violence, to do nothing that undermines the effectiveness of the national effort. This is all more critical at a time when the country is observing the annual 16 days of no violence against women and children. The presidency notes that Mr. and Mrs. Mkhari met the representatives of certain civil organizations and senior officials in the presidency today, but unfortunately the resolution reached by the parties was too late to ensure his participation. Basically, the president is raising issues of gender-based violence, as you've correctly alluded to, of Mr. and Mrs. Mkhari being involved in charging one another and laying charges on another of gender-based violence in an incident that happened earlier on in the year between Mr. and Mrs. Mkhari, which is an issue that has shrouded this particular event. Civil society organizations coming on to protest to President Ramaphosa, saying Given Mkhari is not the person to have a conversation with, looking at the fact that he is accused of gender-based violence himself. Some have also expressed their displeasure of the late communication by the president, saying that this interaction should have taken much earlier on, so that people don't have to come here at the Houghton Hotel and to find out on the 11th hour that the president will no longer be participating in this conversation, saying this conversation should have been heard much earlier on and resolved upon. And some even saying that the president should have indeed come forth here to the Houghton Hotel to have this particular discussion and tell Given Mkhari to his face and to the nation to address the issue of gender-based violence, to show the seriousness and the veracity of the issue, and that the president is willing to confront men head-on who are accused of this particular evil deed.
All right, then. Well, thank you so much, Samkele Maseko, for that analysis. Of course, just involving there the official government, that is a statement released with regards to why the president pulled out from Power FM's chairman's conversation. But with me, I have my colleague Thulasizwe Smelane, just to give us more of analysis of what this actually means, particularly for Given Mkhari, for Ipelem Mkhari, for the president, for the country at large, whereby we are still facing issues around gender-based violence. Thank you so much, colleague, for your time. The president took quite a decisive decision there not to, of course, associate himself with both Given Mkhari as well as the chairman's conversation. We have a dark cloud in South Africa where Uinene Mkhwekyana, of course, is a 19-year-old student who was murdered by, of course, a man at a post office. Now, recently in Limpopo, Precious Ramamburana as well, stabbed 50 times. This clearly is an issue that the president is taking very seriously.
Absolutely. I mean, this, of course, Tumelo, comes off the back of the civil society organizations, the Wise Collective, as as well as Soul City Institute, having written to the president a few days ago to appeal to him to not take part in this event, this chairman's conversation. This was always almost like the elephant in the room in as far as the chairman's conversation is concerned, right? Because last year, when this event was held, the incident of violence in the Mkhari home, there was, where there was a charge that had been laid by Ipeleng Mkhari,
right,
and a counter charge laid by Given Mkhari, was still fresh in everyone's minds. And I do remember that even back then there were attempts to try and march on the event and sort of to try and focus attention on this key issue, to say Given needs to account for what happened in the Mkhari home. And I remember I did ask Given at that event last year, and we actually have that on record. Even then it was a bit, it was a bit tricky. There was no real talking about it. It felt as if there was a sense of offense about, why are you asking me about this? We are here for the chairman's conversation. I suppose people who will be questioning will now really be questioning the timing of it all, because you and I, we are all, accredited and ready. The hall is just behind us. It's open and people are getting ready to get inside. The who's who in various sectors of society is arriving, and this decision coming at this point. But clearly the president was being put to the test here to say, walk the talk. You are saying you are championing the fight against violence against women in the society. You've called summits. You had the gender-based violence summit. You've committed 1.6 billion rand to this emergency action plan. But what about your actions? Are you going to continue to associate with someone who's been implicated in this way, in the scourge that we are trying to fight? And the president making the decision at the 11th hour, really, to say, I'm pulling out.
Absolutely. And I mean, when we look at some of the cases, such as Precious Ramaphosa, where she was killed or stabbed 50 times, the president came out and said to the police minister, Begicele, you need to avail all resources possible to ensure that this case is given the right amount of attention, so that we address the issue of domestic violence, or rather gender-based violence. And of course there were leads that were being made whereby a suspect has now been arrested. But my question to you is, when it comes to perhaps the president's intimate circle where some of his advisors are, did someone in the room not mention and say, actually, upon the receipt of this invitation, let's question some of these allegations posed by the chairman?
You hit the nail on the head, Dumelo, because the presidency is a system. It has a director general. From my previous experience, I was told that to get an appointment with the president, you almost have to book it a year in advance, to say, in a year's time, I would like the president to be at my event, and they see whether they can squeeze you into the diary. This does raise questions in as far as vetting in the presidency, and also them deciding, because these allegations are not new. This situation in the Mkhari home, it's been a year already that it's been out there. What happened at the moment at which the invitation came to say, please take part in this year's chairman's conversation? Did the office of the president not look at it and say, where does this fit in with our communication strategy, our messaging? Right now you are championing the fight against the male violence against women in our society. How does that sit with how we are projecting you as the leader of this particular fight? And perhaps make these decisions much earlier on. We understand that there was some kind of engagement between the Mkharis and the civil society organizations at the presidency. This is according to the president's statement. But it certainly does raise questions as to what kind of vetting of events goes into this.
How do you then expect Given Mkhari to address the situation? As you can see behind us, we already have guests walking in, some getting comfortable, some perhaps not even aware that the breaking news is this event is not taking place. How do you think then he would address the room, address the country?
It's kind of difficult to predict what Given Mkhari will say. As I say, last year I actually raised this issue quite a few times in the build-up to the actual broadcast which we carried on ENCA of the chairman's conversation. And even back then, I got the sense that, you're sort of touching a nerve, really, in as far as asking these questions, because there was a feeling, and I must say that I got this feeling from both of them, Ipeleng Mkhari and Given Mkhari, that, as a couple, in fact, I think the words were, we've had our issues which we are dealing with, and we've worked through our issues. But this is where now this issue then comes back to say, To what extent do you continue to say domestic violence is a domestic issue, and also talking about cases that are withdrawn as a phenomenon on their own? To what extent do you get people to account publicly, especially someone who's a public figure? There are many alternative ways, of course, Tumelo, that you could argue the president could have taken. He could have come here, sat down with Given, and before the interview starts, he says to Given, it's a scenario I've imagined, where he says, Given, you and I are going to have a great conversation, but before we get there, I am leading the fight against violence against women in this country. I need you to account for your actions. What happened in your home? And why did you lay a hand on your wife? Was this the first time it happened? How many times has it happened before? And if you're going to apologize, what subsequent other actions are you taking so that you turn the situation around and actually become someone who's involved in the fight against gender-based violence? That's one alternative.
Absolutely, Tulas. I couldn't have imagined that scenario even better, because for a platform that is meant to hold the president accountable for some of his decisions, some of his actions, his choices since being in office, you would expect that the same would be, of course, given to the host of the conversation. If you are so much in belief of holding accountable those who are in power, perhaps we need to hold you accountable for your position as the chairman, as well as in your hushold as a husband.
Absolutely, you nail it. I mean, and he also could have even warned him beforehand to say, don't expect me to leave this thing being the elephant in the room. I am going to talk about it. And that's the decision that, as a journalist, I made last year, that this issue can't be the elephant in the room. We can't act like this didn't happen. We live in this society that we live in, where being a woman is it's really a dangerous form of existence. So therefore we can't normalize. I mean, you talk about there's a scale to these things. You have a smack today. Today's smack is 52 steps.
Absolutely.
It really is on that scale. It really is that grim in our society. So sadly, for the listeners of Power FM and the viewers at home and other people who are looking forward to hearing from the president on the various issues that were potentially going to come up, they're not going to get that opportunity. But you can't shy away from this conversation that needs to happen, and one way or another, this conversation is happening.
But you can also give the president his due respect for taking a decision where he felt that he needed to make the right decision, especially in terms of him placing so much attention on gender-based violence as part of his administration. Let's not talk about the critical role that also civil society is playing here. Listen, I think in my opinion, if it hadn't been for those organizations, including Soul City Institute, writing to the president and saying, we need to have a conversation about your participation in this, perhaps we'd still see the president having a conversation with Given Mkhari today. What's the role that we're seeing here from civil society, students who marched to the World Economic Forum in Cape Town after 19-year-old student Uyine Mkhwetyana was murdered at post office, saying this conversation is not happening without you addressing the elephant in the room, which is GBV.
It's one of the exciting things about our democracy, Tumelo, the role and the vigor of civil society. And if you place it in historical context, you think about, just yesterday I was doing an interview with someone from the Medical Research Council, and we were talking about this new ARV, and I started thinking about reading the TAC2 judgment, and sort of hearing some of the weird arguments that government used to put up about why they could not roll out antiretroviral treatment, which had been proven to be, clinically safe, but they were still making these arguments about effectiveness and efficacy and safety. It was civil society that pushed back then to say, actually, we will litigate if we have to, with the result that today we sit with the world's biggest public antiretroviral program in the world. Remember the Zuma years, when there was even that questioning of whether or not state capture and corruption exists, and whether it's happening to the scale that we were being told. It was civil society that was active then. It's one of the things I celebrate about this this democracy, that civil society can take up a cause and champion it and actually push and fight for it.
And indeed, the beauty is that their voices are indeed heard. Well, of course, as you've heard, Faith, that is indeed the turn-off event right here at the Houghton Hotel in Johannesburg. This is the setting of what should have been the chairman's conversation between MSG Africa's chairman, Given Mkhari, as well as President Cyril Ramaphosa. What we do know right now is that conversation is not happening. Of course, civil society is saying the president, if he is indeed serious about addressing gender-based violence, he would take this matter seriously and not have this conversation. And indeed, he's heeded the call. Back to you in studio.
Thanks very much for that, Dumela Mututwane, out there at the Houghton Hotel, where that conversation with the chairman as well as the president was supposed to take place, but now is not.